Alrighty, so my name is Mitchell Gaskins. This is my audience today. I have Jeremy, Keith, and Tracy, and I'll be informing you guys today about a very influential man from church history. We're going to look at 3 instances from his life where he demonstrated great resolve and commitment to what he believed to be good and right and true. And in order to bracket this conversation, I'd like to define a few terms and then ask you a question so that you might be able to empathize more with our main guy. So the first term is orthodoxy, which will just be understood in this speech as right belief, consistent with the Bible. The second term is Westminster Confession of Faith, which is a confessional document drawn up in the 1600s that has united Christians around what they believe the Bible to say for about 400 years. And then the third term is modernism. Modernism started to prevail all around culture in general at about the late 1800s and early 1900s, and pervades even to this day. In terms of our conversation, modernism invaded the church about that time, and we started seeing significant departures from orthodoxy as it had traditionally and historically been known and identified throughout the creeds. So, those are some important terms. And now, the question. Have you ever been placed in a situation where doing what you believe to be right or good or true set you at odds with people that you cared about or maybe respected? You don't have to respond, but I don't think any of us likes being in that sort of confrontation. It can be awkward and scary, and if the stakes are high enough, it can really change the way that we do life. It can turn our worlds upside down. So the guy we're going to be discussing today was named Dr. J. Gresham Machen, and Machen, like I mentioned earlier, was a man who just about at every point demonstrated a rich commitment to what he believed to be orthodox, according to the scriptures. And at some of the hardest times in American history, he didn't shy away from pursuing what he believed to be true. And I hope that by hearing about 3 instances of him doing this, we might all be encouraged to do likewise. So, the first instance in which Dr. Machen did this was with his career at Princeton Theological Seminary. Princeton, as you guys might know, was just an awesome school, richly devoted to the historic Reformed faith, the Orthodox standards, the Westminster Confession, all those things that Machen was very sympathetic to, old Princeton stood for. And about 1906 is when Machen started teaching there. He was a professor of New Testament and Greek, and he taught there for 23 years. And right at the beginning of that time, so 1906 and onward, the seeds of theological liberalism were being sown. And Machen recognized this, and he was antsy, if you will. But Princeton didn't ask him to formally subscribe to any of those modernist trends that were threatening orthodoxy at the time. So Machen felt kind of fine in his conscience to, sign up, be on board, and be a professor who did stand for the Orthodox standards, who was really in line with the predecessors of his age, people like B.B. Warfield, Charles Hodge, and his son A.A. Hodge. Those are kind of the last great Princeton theologians, including Machen himself. So Machen, he signed up, taught for 23 years, and in 1929, Princeton added 2 new board members, and with them came the public declaration that Princeton was becoming a modernist liberal institution. That was their own declaration. So what this meant largely was a departure from orthodoxy, and there were still going to be Orthodox people there and Orthodox standards, but more or less what had been understood to be Orthodox, so basically the Westminster Confession of Faith, the traditional interpretation of it was just being thrown away. And this view that it could be interpreted in any way that you wanted was entering the scene. And some of the initial things that this looked like was a denial of the supernatural in the Bible. So that was really what Machen was dealing with in his little time span of it. So 1929, those board members come on, and the institution changes, and they ask Machen to actually subscribe this time to the new form of the modernist gospel, and he cannot do so. he believes it's wrong. So in the midst of the Great Depression, which is the clutch point here, he decides to walk away from a salary of 23 years and no doubt all the notoriety that came with being one of the great Princeton theologians. So, and he's a New Testament scholar, basically from Princeton, even to this day, the last great Greek scholar to ever be there. He understood the Greek language in ways that people never had before and shan't have afterward. And his Greek grammar is still being used in theological institutions all over the world. So that same year, in response to walking away from Princeton, though, in 1929, he was able to found Westminster Theological Seminary, and you can tell based on its name what that school was founded to stand for, which is the Westminster Confession of Faith. And not as being something over and above Scripture, but being the way in which we understand Scripture as a subservient standard. So, having I guess we can't call it reformed, having, corrected that area of theological higher education, that sphere of his influence, by stepping away from Princeton and founding Westminster, he was able to shift his attention to an area of corruption within his own denomination, and that was the Presbyterian Church of the United States of America. He was a minister in there, and in the years 1930 to 1933, the PCUSA was sending out missionaries all over the world who were really after the heart of Princeton. They did not believe, for instance, in the inerrancy of Scripture, didn't believe that Jesus was born of a virgin, and in some of the most severe cases didn't even believe Jesus ever existed. So, missionaries carrying this gospel that Machen believed to be devoid of hope, because, echoing the words of Paul, he would say, if Jesus didn't raise from the dead, then Christians of all people in the world are the most to be pitied. So Machen understood that this was not the gospel of the Bible, and in response to it, he didn't step away from his denomination at this point, but he founded in 1933 the Independent Board of Presbyterian Foreign Missions. And this was, as suggested, something that existed next to the church, but was able to be overseen by a minister in the church, Dr. Machen himself, and a small board which he had assembled. And for 2 years under his presidency, he was able to oversee faithful gospel missions to many nations. And that was an excellent testimony. So that's the second way in which he proved himself faithful in the midst of uncertainty. But the third way kind of bleeds together with this point, but it's still distinct. 2 years after he founded it, so 1935, the PCUSA at its General Assembly called Machen to trial. And they essentially presented him with an ultimatum. They said, the direction that our church is walking. Our foreign mission department stands for the modernist gospel. And you have founded the independent board, which stands for the traditional Orthodox gospel. So this is your choice. Stay with your board or maintain your ministering credentials, but you cannot do both. And Machen chose to stay with the independent board. And so the PCUSA defrocked him, which is the formal term given to the removal of a man's ministering credentials, and he was no longer understood to be a minister in the PCUSA. So that happened in 1935, and it took him about a year to assemble everything that he believed the Bible necessitated of a church. So the proper leadership, the right doctrinal standards to be drawn up, just things in line to protect against, walking away from orthodoxy once again. But in 1936, he was able to found a brand new denomination of the Christian church, the Orthodox Presbyterian Church. And as of this year, it will be turning 83 years old. So that's a cool little testimony. But the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, much like Westminster, you can tell by its name what it was founded to stand for and what to this day it strives to stand for. And Westminster's catchline today is, creating and training Bible experts. So very much so after the heart of Dr. Machen. And then the OPC's standpoint is, believing the gospel to be the only rule of life and faith, and understanding the Westminster Confession to be that system of doctrine that's taught in Holy Scripture. So those are 3 instances. Machen's walking away from Princeton to found Westminster. Machen's not siding with his own mission department in his denomination, even when he was a minister, in order to found something that was independent, that was more consistent with Scripture. and then ultimately his walking away from the PCUSA to found the OPC. And those are 3 instances in which he was faithful, and hopefully 3 ways in which he, by remembering him, calls us to be faithful. Thank you.
Thank you.